Welcome to Washington Today on C-SPAN Radio for Friday, September 16th, 2022. White House officials reportedly holding a meeting about immigration after this week's episodes of migrants from the U.S.-Mexico border transported by Republican governors of Florida and Texas to Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts and to Washington, D.C. in front of the vice president's residence. We'll hear from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis and the White House press secretary, Jean-Pierre. Federal judge appointing a special master to review documents taken in the FBI search of former President Donald Trump's Florida home for possible executive client privilege. And while that's going on, barring the Justice Department from using documents marked classified in its criminal investigation into possible mishandling of the documents. President Biden meeting with the families of two Americans held in Russian prisons, Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan, as efforts continue to free them from what the U.S. calls wrongful detention. In Ukraine, a mass grave discovered in a northern town the Ukrainian military has just liberated from Russian forces. And back in Washington, the U.S. House Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress holding its final hearing. We'll talk with a reporter from Roll Call about what the committee accomplished, including trying to bridge the Democratic-Republican divide. And we start with immigration. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis responding to the reports, White House officials and cabinet leaders meeting to discuss a response to the Republican governors sending immigrants from the U.S.-Mexico border to other states. Governor DeSantis sending planes with the migrants to Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Texas Governor Greg Abbott sending buses to Washington, D.C., dropping off migrants in front of Vice President Kamala Harris's residence.
I also was a little bit perplexed when I heard that the president is scrambling to get his cabinet together to try to address the fact that you have governors who are helping to relocate illegal aliens to sanctuary cities. Now, he didn't scramble to get his cabinet together when we had millions of people illegally pouring across the southern border. He didn't scramble to get his cabinet together when you had 53 migrants die in some trailer in Texas because they were neglected by the federal government. You didn't see him scramble to get his cabinet together when we had Americans that were victimized by criminal aliens that he led across the border. You didn't see him scramble to get his cabinet together when we hit record fentanyl deaths, which that fentanyl is coming across his open border. It's only when you have 50 illegal aliens end up in a very wealthy, rich sanctuary enclave that he decides to scramble on this. And so I think what we are doing what we're continuing to do is use every tool at our disposal to insulate the state of Florida from the negative ramifications of his reckless border policies. And yes, that involves helping with transport. It involves suing on catch and release, which we have done. It's involved making sure that contractors are held accountable if they're facilitating this into our state. And we have a statewide grand jury that's looking at different types of practices that may be going on in the state that's exacerbating the problem. And so, the end of the day, this is a massive policy failure by the president. This is a massive and intentional policy that is causing huge amount of damage all across the country, and it's all rooted in a failure to take care that the laws are faithfully executed and to fulfill his oath of office.
Florida Governor Ron DeSantis today, an event that mostly focused on the economy. He was at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University in Daytona Beach. From CNN, the roughly 50 migrants who were sent by plane to Martha's Vineyard in Massachusetts by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis this week were transported to a military base Friday to receive shelter and humanitarian support, officials said. In this article from Rolling Stone, the migrants flown to Martha's Vineyard by Florida Governor Ron DeSantis claim they were lured into boarding the flight with deceptive promises that they'd be taken to Boston for work opportunities and expedited papers, something experts say could constitute a violation of federal law. At the White House, Press Secretary Jean-Pierre with this statement.
Yesterday, 2 Republican governors reportedly lured 100 asylum seekers, including children, onto planes and buses with false premises and then abandoned them on the side of a busy road thousands of miles away with nothing but Ziploc bags of their belongings in hand. These were children, they were moms, they were fleeing communism. And what did Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott do to them? They used them as political pawns, treated them like chattel in a cruel, premeditated political stunt. Why else would Governor DeSantis have spent the time to charter a flight to take migrants out of a different state, not even his state, a different state, and hire a videographer to capture footage of that flight, but not bother to let Massachusetts authorities know that migrant children in need of food and shelter were about to land on their doorstep? These vulnerable migrants were reportedly misled about where they were headed, told they would be headed to Boston, misled about what they would be provided when they arrived, promised shelter, refuge, benefits, and more. These are the kinds of tactics we see from smugglers in places like Mexico and Guatemala. And for what? A photo op? Because these governors care about creating political theater than creating actual solutions to help folks who are fleeing communism, to help children, to help families. Instead, they want to do political stunts. President Biden put forward a comprehensive immigration reform package on his first day in office and secured record funding for the Department of Homeland Security. We once again invite Republicans to support both. President Biden will remain focused on strengthening and uniting our country, even if extreme Republicans leaders remain hell-bent on doing the complete opposite.
White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre with reporters in the White House briefing room. Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff asked today about the migrants from Texas that got off the bus in front of the residence that he and his wife, Vice President Kamala Harris, are residing in during her time in office. It's the U.S. Naval Observatory in Washington, D.C.
Gentlemen, I wonder if you had a reaction to the migrants that were outside your residence, PCR residence, on yesterday.
Yeah, I do have a reaction. I think it was shameful. These are human beings. These are people. They needed to be treated with dignity and kindness and respect, and they weren't. And we have so-called leaders in this country who, rather than focusing on what's good for the public within their own states, they're using people as pawns for a political stunt. I think it's shameful.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff answering a question at an event that dealt with a different issue. He and Dr. Ashish Jha, the White House COVID-19 response coordinator, getting the new booster shot at a clinic in D.C., also getting their flu shot. An Axios article has this: border officials are now encountering an average of 8,500 migrants and asylum seekers a day, a strikingly high number, according to government data provided to Axios. The article continues. The Donald Trump White House proposed transporting detained immigrants to sanctuary cities in 2018 and 2019, but was rebuffed by the legal department at Immigration and Customs Enforcement. National Hispanic Heritage Month began this week. It runs from yesterday, September 15th, through October 15th. Senator Rick Scott, Republican of Florida, tweeting a video on Thursday, writing, President Biden has completely abandoned the fight for freedom and democracy in Latin America. As Hispanic Heritage Month begins, we're calling on the Biden administration to reverse course and start standing for freedom, democracy, and security in the Western Hemisphere. Here is that video. You'll hear clips from a news conference outside the White House. Senator Scott joined by Senator Marco Rubio, also Republican from Florida.
So we're here at the White House today to just give a voice to activists that are concerned that the Biden administration has completely abandoned Latin America.
We're here today because Joe Biden has turned a deaf ear and blind eye to the fight for freedom and democracy in Latin America. He has chosen to appease dictators in Cuba and Venezuela. He has taken a weak, soft-handed approach to Daniel Ortega in Nicaragua, and he has allowed dictators to destabilize the region and spread socialism as they let Iran, Russia, and Communist China expand their influence in our hemisphere.
Today, there's nothing comes out of this White House that's proactive on the cause of liberty and freedom in the region. They were against the additional sanctions on the regime in Cuba. They were against the interim government in Venezuela. They were against the sanctions that we put in place against Nicaragua. They were against all of these things. And these are the people that are running Western Hemispheric affairs in the building behind us now.
I think it's important to give a voice to the people that have come to the United States for freedom, but they have relatives or friends back in Latin America. And they want to make sure this administration, which should be the beacon of freedom in the world, starts showing up and doing something. And so I'm here to help them.
And I think it was a very important opportunity that Senator Scott gave us to speak to the American people so they know and realize how horrible it is to live under an oppressed regime like Nicaragua.
Everybody deserves human rights, and the Biden administration doesn't care about it for Latin America.
That video posted by Senator Rick Scott. You also heard Senator Marco Rubio, both Republican from Florida, and an activist joining them. News conference outside the White House. The chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus also tweeting a video on Thursday.
Hi, this is Congresswoman Nanette Barragan, and I want to wish you a happy Hispanic Heritage Month. Today I want to share some of the challenges and obstacles I've overcome to get to where I am. I'm the youngest of 11 kids. Spanish was my first language. That meant I had to work harder in school and study longer hours. My mother only had a third grade education. My dad was a local TV repairman. All of this was in an effort to make ends meet and provide for my siblings and I. It was from my parents that I learned the value of hard work, and I'm grateful for the opportunity they gave my siblings and I by immigrating to California and building a life here. However, my parents' lack of education meant I was on my own when it came to applying for college and taking out loans. I took out these loans in order to attend UCLA and then USC Law School, and I'm still paying them back as a member of Congress. These challenges and obstacles fueled my passion to help others within my community. But my story is not unique. There are millions of families like mine who come to this country looking for opportunity for both themselves and their children. It's our job as members of Congress to secure these opportunities for this generation and all who follow. As Vice Chair of the Congressional Hispanic Caucus, my colleagues and I are working hard to mitigate these disparities and create opportunities for Hispanic people to achieve their dreams. As we celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, let us all reflect on the challenges and obstacles that we have faced that have led us to where we are today, and promise to future generations that these opportunities will be available to them when they grow up. We must continue to fight to increase representation, expand access to health care, counter climate change, and ensure Hispanic communities can thrive. Thank you, and happy Hispanic Heritage Month.
Congresswoman Nanette Barragan, Democrat from California, chairs the Congressional Hispanic Caucus with that video tweet from Thursday. National Hispanic Heritage Month, as mentioned, runs from September 15th through October 15th. The reason that was chosen is that September 15th is significant, an anniversary date for Latin American countries Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. Also, Mexico and Chile celebrate their Independence Days on September 16th and 18th, respectively. And Columbus Day, or Dia de la Raza, which is October 12th, falls within the 30-day period. U.S. District Judge Thursday appointing what is called a special master to review documents taken in the FBI search of former President Donald Trump's home in Mar-a-Lago, Florida. Special master is Raymond Deary, a senior district judge, Eastern District of New York, and was one of the candidates proposed by Donald Trump's legal team, and the Justice Department did not object to that selection. He will be looking for documents that the government should not have access to due to attorney-client privilege. Judge Cannon also blocking until the review is done the Justice Department's using the 100 or so documents marked as classified that were seized in its investigation of former President Trump's handling of the documents. C-SPAN getting reaction to this morning. Also, the ongoing investigation into the January 6th attack on the U.S. Capitol from Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat from Connecticut, member of the Intelligence Committee.
Your review of the various, in particular the DOJ investigations into the two investigations. One, the Mar-a-Lago documents that were seized, and two, the investigation into the prior to January 6th and the actions of the former president prior to January 6th.
Well, on the latter one, the actions of the president prior to January 6th, of course, resulted in his impeachment in the House of Representatives. And we all know why. We've watched that story. The president, his, I think, exact words were, "You need to go up to the hill and fight, or you will not have a country anymore." He urged on the violent attackers at the Capitol on January 6th, and I think he was appropriately impeached for that. What we're learning now with the investigation is it wasn't just the president, right? It was Rudy Giuliani, who is losing his law licenses around the country. It was Sidney Powell. It was John Eastman. There was a whole cabal of people around the president who made a plan, a very serious plan involving serious lawyers, not saying serious things, but to try to stop the peaceful transfer of power in this country for the first time in 240 years. That's a big deal. To your second question, or the first question, I should say, I sit on the Intelligence Committee, so every day I take my watch off, I take my phone out of my pocket, any electronics, I leave them in a locker, I go through 2 locked doors, and when I look at classified information, it has the markings that all of America got to see because these documents were sitting on the floor at Mar-a-Lago. And if I take those documents out of that SCIF, that Secure Compartmented Information Facility, there's a good chance that I will be charged with a crime, the way David Petraeus was when he mishandled classified information, the way former CIA Director John Deutsch was. The notion that there was highly sensitive classified information sitting on a carpet in a private club in Florida with people, including foreigners, coming in and out, is just, if you're in the business of handling classified information, that is absolutely mind-blowing.
The former president told radio host Hugh Hewitt president has an absolute right to declassify documents.
Well, you know what's interesting about that, Bill? His lawyers haven't made that case, right? He said it. Now, your viewers can judge whether Donald Trump is a paragon of honesty and always tells the truth like George Washington, but his lawyers have not made that argument. You know why? Because his lawyers aren't going to say something in court that isn't true. And so, of course Donald Trump is saying that, but there's a process for declassification. It goes through all these reviews and everything, and there's no doubt in my mind, given that his lawyers aren't making that argument, that process didn't happen.
Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat from Connecticut, Intelligence Committee member on C-SPAN's Washington Journal program this morning. Fox News contributor Lara Trump, daughter-in-law to the former president, had this take on the appointment of the special master in the Mar-a-Lago documents case.
Usually in matters like this, this is very standard to have a special master appointed whenever there is any dispute over documents like this. Yet for some reason, the Department of Justice pushed back pretty hard against the idea of having this objective, neutral, third-party individual put into the mix to clear the air, to bring transparency and trust back to an institution that obviously a lot of Americans distrust at this point, which is really sad. At every turn, it seems like the Department of Justice and the FBI have gone the opposite way in making people feel less trustworthy of our institutions. And in order to operate in America, we need to have trust in these organizations and institutions. So obviously we feel, at least from our perspective and my father-in-law's team, that this is a step in the right direction. But again, unfortunately, it just feels like such pushback from the DOJ. It makes people wonder, what are they trying to hide? Did something nefarious happen? Why wouldn't they also want the appointment of a special master?
Lara Trump, Fox News contributor on Fox News Channel today. The U.S. District Judge has set November 30th as the deadline for Judge Dearie to complete his review as special master in the case involving the official documents taken from Mar-a-Lago. Washington Today continues in a moment.
There are a lot of places to get political information, but only at C-SPAN do you get it straight from the source. No matter where you are from or where you stand on the issues, C-SPAN is America's network. Unfiltered, unbiased, word for word. If it happens here, or here, or here, or anywhere that matters, America is watching on C-SPAN, powered by cable.
Welcome back to Washington Today, which you can get as a podcast on the free C-SPAN Now mobile video app and wherever you get your podcasts. Biden administration responding to the discovery of a mass grave in Izium, Ukraine, which Ukrainian forces recently recaptured from the Russian military. The head of the Kharkiv Regional Administration saying on social media there's likely more than 1,000 Ukrainian citizens tortured and killed in liberated territories in the Kharkiv region. He added among the bodies that were exhumed today, 99% showed signs of violent death. At the White House in Washington, John Kirby, Strategic Communications Director for the National Security Council.
Together with our allies and partners, the United States has been delivering an unprecedented amount of weapons and equipment that Ukraine's forces are using quite skillfully in the field. And you just saw, I think yesterday, last night, we announced our 21st package of security assistance using presidential drawdown authorities. This is a $600 million package that includes ammunition for those HIMARS systems that you're all familiar with now, the high mobility artillery rocket systems. Tens of thousands of artillery rounds, additional counter unmanned aerial systems and mine clearing equipment, small arms and ammunition. There's a lot more in the package. We're going to continue to provide Ukraine with key capabilities to meet their evolving battlefield requirements, and they are evolving battlefield requirements. I also want to just take a moment to address the reports that we've been seeing today out of Izium and the potential here for mass graves, which, in Izium, as you know, Ukraine just recently liberated from Russian control. The reports that we're seeing just in general are more than 440 graves, which reportedly includes civilians. And it's horrifying. It's repugnant. And sadly, it's in keeping with the kind of depravity and the brutality with which Russian forces have been prosecuting this war against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And we're going to continue to actively support efforts to document war crimes and atrocities that Russian forces commit in Ukraine and to assist national and international efforts to identify and hold Russians accountable.
John Kirby is a spokesman for the National Security Council in the White House briefing room today. This story from Reuters: President Vladimir Putin on Friday brushed off a lightning Ukrainian counteroffensive with a smile, but warned that Russia would respond more forcefully if its troops were put under further pressure. Speaking after a summit at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization in the Uzbek city of Samarkand, Vladimir Putin cast the invasion as a necessary step to prevent what he said was a Western plot to break Russia apart. President Biden meeting today with the families of Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan, two Americans convicted of crimes and sentenced to long prison terms in Russia. U.S. officials, including President Biden, saying the two Americans are wrongfully detained. More from the White House briefing with John Kirby.
Once the president met with Trevor Reed's family, the process moved pretty quickly toward his release. Is part of the goal with publicizing these meetings today to put more pressure on Russia to accept that U.S. offer?
The primary goal of the meetings today is to be able to update the families and keep them completely apprised of where we are in the process, and to make clear to them just how much a priority it is for President Biden and his whole team to get them home. That's the focus for today.
John Kirby, Strategic Communications Director for the National Security Council, at the White House briefing today. The U.S. has offered Russia prisoner exchanges to free Brittany Griner and Paul Whelan. Russia has so far not accepted. Another Reuters article, this one from July, includes this paragraph: the United States does not provide an official figure for how many U.S. citizens are detained abroad, but the James W. Foley Legacy Foundation, named after an American journalist abducted and killed in Syria, says that more than 60 U.S. citizens are wrongfully detained in about 18 countries. Bringing those Americans home was the subject of a discussion today between the Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman and Jason Rezaian, author of Prisoner: My 544 Days in an Iranian Prison. He's now a Washington Global Opinions writer.
This, as you know, is a subject that I've been thinking a lot about since my release almost 7 years ago. You and I have been discussing it since almost that time, along with colleagues of yours from the Obama administration, now from the Biden administration, folks in the Trump administration. It's something that I think about a lot. And one of the ideas that keeps coming up in conversations is, this is a practice that's been going on for thousands of years. Some people believe that it's a problem without a solution. I get the sense for the first time that we are dealing with an administration who believes that while they might not know exactly what the solution is, it's out there somewhere. Is that fair to say? And is the consensus within the State Department, the NSC, Homeland Security, and the White House that we can figure this problem out?
There's certainly a determination to do that, Jason. It's not simple. I don't want to kid people. This is hard because we really have to work all over the globe to say that this is not a tool that governments should use, that human beings are not bargaining chips and should not be unjustly detained in these ways and used in these ways. You know, when people ask me what's the hardest thing about being in my role or being a diplomat, I've been lucky enough, this is the 5th Secretary of State I've had the ability to work for and with. The hardest thing I do is meeting with families. I met with and talked with your family, your brother, on a regular basis, as you know, who was a tremendous advocate for you, as was the rest of your family, just never stopped pushing. I've met with Austin Tice's mother. I've met with others, many of the Iranian families of the 4 that are currently detained unjustly in Iran that we're trying to get out. These are brutal meetings. I've met with Christine Levinson. These are just brutal meetings because the pain is so deep and so difficult. And I'm sure that the president's meeting today with the Whalens and with Griner's wife will just be heartbreaking because you want to do everything you can to get Americans home. And then you want to work as hard as you can to really establish a norm around the world and an imperative that countries not use this tool. It is really not a tool. It is a horror show for the people who are imprisoned and for the families who are desperate for their release.
Deputy Secretary of State Wendy Sherman with Jason Rezaian, author of Prisoner, My 544 Days in an Iranian Prison, and now Washington Post Global Opinions writer. Program hosted by The Washington Post. The U.S. House Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress holding its final hearing this week. It is a bipartisan committee, equal number Democrats and Republicans. In a moment, we'll talk with a reporter from Roll Call about what the committee has accomplished and what the future holds. First, here's the committee chair, Derek Kilmer, Democrat from Washington State, opening Wednesday's hearing.
Back in March of 2019, this committee held its very first hearing. The hearing's focus was on past reform efforts, so it's only fitting that as we meet today for the committee's last hearing, our focus is on future reform efforts. We've come full circle. It is hard to believe that this committee will soon be one of those past reform efforts that we looked to for guidance and inspiration just 3.5 years ago. My hope is that we've given future reformers plenty to think about, not only in terms of the recommendations that we've passed, but in terms of how we've worked. I can't emphasize enough how the processes and norms that we've developed along the way have been key to our success as a committee. I think that our work methods deserve just as much attention as our work product. And I really hope future reformers take note of that because more folks recognize that it's possible for Democrats and Republicans to find areas of agreement, to collaborate in good faith, and to produce results on behalf of the American people, the better.
Congressman Derek Kilmer, Democrat from Washington State. More on the work of the House Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. We're joined by Roll Call reporter Chris Cioffi. Thank you very much for being here. I want to read the first paragraph of your article at rollcall.com. It felt almost like a graduation ceremony Wednesday at the final hearing of the committee as witnesses and lawmakers alike celebrated their wins and dreamed of the future. Can you elaborate on what you heard and saw?
Oh, sure. Always fun to hear my words read back. I guess sometimes I wax poetic about the things happening in Congress. No, so the House Modernization Committee is a select committee. It's been around since 2019. It was established at the beginning of the previous Congress. And basically what their work has been is to make recommendations on how to get Congress to be a place that works a little bit better, right? They've they can't make legislation, they can't pass legislation or bring it out of committee, but they can make recommendations. And a lot of those recommendations have seen some action, and some have actually been brought into the House rules package. Some were in appropriation bills, basically things to kind of make the Congress kind of work a little bit better by doing some things to modernize the institution.
What were some of those wins, as you mentioned them?
That's a good question. There have been 171 recommendations, I believe, and they have ranged from all kinds of things to making the Congress a more accessible place, kind of thinking about Americans with Disability Act, things like making places where people who use wheelchairs can get in and out of the Capitol better, fixing doors. This has actually been a problem that's gone on for a while, is that some of the doors in the Capitol still don't have the automatic door opening and closing mechanisms. They made a recommendation to bring back earmarks. They're not called that anymore, but it's kind of a more transparent version of the process where members can request funding for their district. They recommended that the Office of Diversity and Inclusion become a permanent institution in the House, and they also recommended that they raise the House should raise the pay ceiling for staff above what members earn. And so, that's just a few. They have a whole list on their website. And actually, what was interesting about the committee is that in previous iterations of reform committees, we had a joint committee back in 1992. And in that case, they wrote a report at the end of their committee, but they didn't necessarily make recommendations on a rolling basis. But this committee made recommendations on a rolling basis. They've made like 8 tranches of recommendations, if you will. And they've also tracked which ones have been implemented or have seen meaningful action on implementation. And so we're kind of able to see in real time what this committee is kind of doing to kind of try and make the House a more modern place.
We're talking with reporter Chris Cioffi from Roll Call. Were there any recommendations to try to, how can I put this, allow Republicans and Democrats to work together, reach compromise, and sort of remove some of the partisanship that often hinders progress?
Yeah, that's a good question, and it's something that the committee has spent a lot of time thinking about. I believe they had 3 hearings at least on civility and kind of coming up with ways to bring people together. One of those things that they recommended, a couple of recommendations involved orientation. And when new members come in, having some of the subjects and the things that are covered in that freshman orientation for new members to kind of be nonpartisan and include, members of both parties. And I think the committee itself, in a lot of ways, has sort of demonstrated a way that you can have a hearing that fosters a bit more cooperation, unlike a normal committee where, we've all seen them, right? They sit behind a big dais and they kind of look over and question witnesses for 5 minutes. Each person has 5 minutes to ask a question. Republicans sit on one side, Democrats sit on the other. The Modernization Committee has been sitting almost like staggered, where you have Republicans and Democrats sitting next to each other, and instead of behind a dais, they're sitting at a table, like a round table almost. I guess it's a rectangle because they have square tables, but they're like sitting. There's not these rigid 5-minute requirements. Instead, they're giving each other a chance to ask questions. If someone really has something interesting to say, they'll interrupt the other. Well, they won't interrupt, but they'll say, I want to add something here. I want to kind of zero in on this. And so not only do we kind of see some of these bipartisan recommendations they've made, but they've kind of mirrored some of the bipartisanship they think could be possible in other committees by leading by action.
So this committee is going away at the end of the current Congress, at the end of this year. What's the future hold?
Right, and that's something that was actually the subject of their last hearing this week. They basically had to sort of make a recommendation about what to do for future efforts to modernize and how to keep implementing some of the recommendations that they've made that haven't been implemented yet. And so a couple the witnesses proposed a couple different things, but one that was particularly well received by the members of the committee was actually to create a modernization subcommittee in House administration. And so we don't necessarily know yet what the committee will recommend. That will come later this month when they mark up their last recommendations. But I would expect to maybe see some kind of recommendation to create a subcommittee that could kind of keep working on the recommendations that they've made and then help prepare for the next modernization committee that will come at some point in the future. There were a lot of different suggestions, but, you know, the prevailing kind of opinion was that, you know, maybe every 3, 4, 5 Congresses, there would be another select committee. So that was kind of what lawmakers were saying out loud, but it kind of remains to be seen. But that was the House Administration Subcommittee was kind of what got batted around quite a bit.
Chris Cioffi is a reporter with Roll Call. His stories at rollcall.com, and on Twitter, he's at Reporter Cioffi, Cioffi. Thank you very much.
Thanks to you, too.
House of Representatives leaders celebrating this week the new Dean of the House. It's Hal Rogers, Republican from Kentucky. The Dean is the mostly honorary title for the longest-serving member. Hal Rogers has been in the U.S. House since 1981. He became dean earlier this year when the previous dean, Don Young, Republican from Alaska, died. On the House floor this past Wednesday, Congressman Steny Hoyer, Democrat from Maryland, the majority leader, speaking about how there have only been a handful of House deans in the history of the United States.
Mr. Rogers of Kentucky has achieved that distinction and become our new Dean of the House. It is humbling to think that our Dean is from the same freshman class as I am. He was just shy of 5 months here before me, as does the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Smith. When he arrived here, we met the Dean of the House, Jamie Whitten of Mississippi, who served in the House 122 years. I don't want to offend anyone from Mississippi. I know it was short of that time, but it was a long time. Mr. Whitten had been elected first in 1941. He himself came to office when the Dean of the House had been elected in 1907, and the person who had been Dean at that time was elected in 1879, which is to say, there aren't a lot of deans of the House. On the day that member entered as freshman, Abraham Lincoln was first sworn in as President of the United States. Fewer deans of the House by far than presidents of the United States. So we are connected to the 37th Congress of the United States and the Lincoln presidency by just 4 individual members' span of service.
Congressman Steny Hoyer, Democrat from Maryland, majority leader on the House floor on Wednesday. The new House Dean, Hal Rogers, Republican from Kentucky, is number 22 on the all-time list of longest-serving House members. He's closing in on 42 years. He is running for re-election this year. The record holder is the late Congressman John Dean, Democrat from Michigan, 59 years in the U.S. House. Thanks for listening to Washington Today. Get more of Washington's top stories sent to you every day by subscribing to C-SPAN's evening newsletter, Word for Word. You can sign up at c-span.org/connect. Have a good night and weekend.